for Italian Association and Fabitalia Lifestyle, together with the Language Center. Today, we have a very interesting lecture, an event about an important, probably the most important Italian who has given some presence here in Singapore. And this Italian is Rodolfo Nolli. For the ones of you who already know him, you have probably seen some of his monuments, but later we'll see where. And for the ones of you who don't know about that, it's a good opportunity to know more today. So let's see what about Cavaliere Rodolfo Nolli, an Italian artist born in Singapore. What do we know about Nolli? So probably the ones of you who have been in Tanjong Pagar railway station, the ones of you will have probably seen the 4 pillars of the economy by Rodolfo Nolli, even though some people say it might be another artist. But for sure, Nolli is the one who gave the style for a lot of productions and monuments here in Singapore. And we will see where they are. And not even only that, but we can say more in general, I would like to speak more about the context in which Nolli worked. I will say, and we'll probably get it at the end of this conference, that Cavaliere Rodolfo Nolli was not the only one to give some special forging in Singapore, but the Italian style itself is the one who is much more present than what we think and esteem in Singapore. Let's see how it can be. So we will work a bit on architecture history. We will relate to the British Empire, and we'll see how much of the Italian style, including Nolli, but not only him, affected Southeast Asia and not only even Singapore, but other countries as well. Let's see about him and about Italian style in Singapore. So, let's explore the legacy of the Italian artist Cavaliere Rodolfo Nolli, and let's see what is the mark that Nolli left on Singapore with these stunning creations, which represented the last signs of the British colonial architectural era. So we'll speak a bit about that, and we'll see what's the influence of Italian architecture on it. We'll showcase some of his most iconic masterpieces, providing a unique insight into the history of the relationship between Singapore and Italy. So, let's start with that, and let's see what is his contribution to architectural landscape of Singapore. I will start with some comics. So we can see that Nolli is not only in the history, in the monuments, in some icons, iconic landscapes of Singapore, but we can also find him, of course, in books, architectural books. You can find something about him on the internet, but also in some comics. This one is very interesting about the history of Singapore, and I took something from my private collection. So if you think about Nolli, one that Nolli is very famous is about this monument after death. What is this? If you can recognize it, this one is the Supreme Court and the pronaos, or basically the facade of what was the Supreme Court. What is now the Supreme Court? The building which was built in 1929, starting built in 1929, and finished in 1937. This is part of what is called now the National Gallery. National Gallery, through a French architectural studio and Singaporean studios as well, is the union of the previous Supreme Court, the building built in 1927, with the municipality, the one which was finished just in 1939. And these two buildings are the last British colonial era buildings and palaces built in Singapore. After that, we know that there will be the war. The Japanese will occupy the island. The British basically will collapse quite unfortunately easily, and there will be a terrible revenge of the Japanese in the first 2 weeks against the Chinese population mostly. After that, even though when the British will come back, the resentment of the populations in the Singaporeans, not yet Singaporeans, the population under the British Empire will be quite strong, and this will lead to the sentiment of independence later, temporary half of independence and self-government in 1958 till 1963, after the Prime Minister, the second Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, will lead Singapore into the Federation of Malaysia, and later they will go out and declare thus the independence of Singapore as a new state. So these are the last two British colonial buildings which have been built, and they still represent the colonial style of the British, which was shown in all over their colonies. So we will speak about Nolli, but basically through Nolli we are speaking about what's the influence of the Italian architecture in the colonial era, not only in what is Singapore, but also what was Malaysia. And of course, when we speak about the British colonial style, we are not speaking only about what is something typical of the Victorian style or even before, but also how these colonial British styles, they mix with the different countries. So as the British Empire was all over the world, basically according to the climate and the geographical position of some of these areas, the British colonial style will be different, mixing with the local styles. So what is important? Basically, there is a base, which is the one given and the time that Italy was leading in terms of cultures and architecture, mostly, and in many other cultural fields. These are the affections that Italy brought to the British colonial style. So we have to think about what I mean here. So there are many Italian artists, and especially Palladio. So the Italian Palladian, the neoclassicist, and Victorian Italianized style, which forged mass of Southeast Asia, and not only, especially in the areas of the British Empire, before, during, and after the Victorian period. We know that Queen Victoria ruled for around 70 years, just surpassed by Queen Elizabeth, and she ruled in the period of the colonial period of the British in Singapore. So what is the British colonial style? Is basically a mixture of what is this part of British style. Basically, we will see it later, taking the Palladian neoclassicist and Italianized style with local colonized country styles, in which we can see, for instance, when we see the bungalows as well here, the famous black and white bungalows, and also the Malaysian and what was Malaya, because at the time Malaysia didn't exist, but the full area of this Southeast Asia was under Malaya and the British Singapore settlements. Therefore, there are a lot of decorations and parts which are in order to provide the cooling atmosphere in what are usually hot tropical climates in this case. So let's speak about Palladio. Why is Palladio so important? Palladio is very important not only for Italian architecture, but basically for world architecture. So Palladio, of course, comes out of the Renaissance, and the villas that he built in his area, in around the Venice and Veneto area. So Palladio is very famous. He's dated in the 15th century. He was born in 1508 and will die in 1580. What is important about Palladio that he creates a very classical style where the forms are just the necessary forms. So it's a very simple, even though sophisticated, proportion and very planned. The idea of the villa of Palladio, which is mostly in northern Italy, is the villa which is a part of a farm. So the idea of the rich merchants in Italy, they used to build these their villas, and the villas were surrounded by their estates, mostly fields, farms with people working for them. So the idea of the villa was something related like that. This will affect a lot British style because the British were enthusiasts and very interested in Italy. We can think from the times of Shakespeare, most of his tragedies and comedies also are ambiented in Italy. The Otello, Romeo and Juliet, even though Romeo and Juliet, you will be surprised, is the original story is from Siena, not from Verona. Anyway, so many architects go to Italy, including the British architect Inigo Jones, which is already in the 16th century. And this Inigo Jones was the surveyor for the King of England's works. So Inigo Jones went to Vicenza, where we have a lot of Palladio's villas, and he could examine the villas in person. He liked them so much, he took a lot of drawings, projects, and then he returned to England because he wanted to introduce, he thought that this classical architecture was perfect for England and or for English architecture, representing the British Empire with the idea of neoclassicism. So Inigo Jones was the first one, but we have to see that also in the 17th century, with the Ascendant Whigs party, and with their idea to meet with the needs of the ancient rules of politics, with the rationality and the plain serious style, which could represent the politics of the British Empire at the time. So they thought the politics included ethics, art, and aesthetics. And the politics laid emphasis on social duty, moderation, tolerance, social good sense, politeness, decency, and the civilized virtues. Therefore, all this kind of principles were perfect in this Palladian style, and therefore they also brought in their colonial British style. So everything was perfect, taken from Andrea Palladio. Basically, British politics of the British Empire was represented perfectly by Palladio's architecture. So once they adapted a bit to the British style, they built on hills and they brought also over the British Empire. Remember that anyway, the British here in Southeast Asia will settle around the 17th century, especially after the victory against France in India, and here in Singapore from 1819. So they will bring this Italianized style, this Italianized style and the Palladio style. So we already have this first imprinting given by Palladio. So what was important in the Palladian style and neoclassicism was basically the beautiness and of the form. So Palladio was designing buildings who basically for clients who represented the commerce, commerciants, and aristocrats, people who were rich and mostly gentlemen of leisure, and people who share an intense admiration for ancient Rome. Basically, the British Empire is copying, is imprinted by what is the style of ancient Rome in neoclassicism. So this style was the style of the high Renaissance and steeped in humanist learning. So Palladio, for sure, was the first architect regularly to apply the colonnade temple fronts to secular buildings. What is very interesting also in Palladian style is the geometric order, which arose from the sophisticated system of proportion and an intuitive sense of design. So this is why Andrea Palladio became arguably the most influential architect the Western world has ever known. And we have to thank the British Empire also for that. Speaking of the British Empire, we cannot only mention Palladio, but also have to think of the Italianized style. It's also something that you might be surprised about, but it's very interesting that a lot of Italianized style affected the urbanization, the construction trends of Singapore during the colonial period. So we are already speaking about the 18th century, speaking about Queen Victoria and about the style brought by Raffles. You know that Raffles brought the rule of the 5 foot. So basically, when you were building new houses, you had to respect a coverage, which was called the 5 foot, in which people might walk protected by rain and protected by the sun heat. This is nothing else but, and of course many countries have, but was something that British architects, same as before, that seen in northern Italy as well, which was basically the portics, like the portics in Bologna, which are very typical in northern eastern parts of Italy. So the British brought a lot of innovative styles and solutions that had already been seen in Italy, and also this Italianized style, which basically with the decorations of the neoclassicism and the Renaissance and the Palladian were not only included in the villas but also in the houses. You'll be probably astonished and surprised to know that a lot of the shop houses that basically are the ones that you will think of the Chinese, which was basically the first level, the shop, and the second level, the house, they owe a lot to European style, mostly the Italian and the Portuguese, as we know, the Peranakan style, but also the Chinese style, because basically these houses are the ones that they develop a lot in Singapore, and they take a lot from this Italianized style, basically decoration of calans, Corinthian capitals, and other kind of stuccos, which are typical of Italy. So this is very surprising that, according to the Italianized style, the shop house basically represented the form of woman. If we go to Chinatown and basically to Pagoda Street, if you go up toward the Paradise Garden, which is the bridge in which will connect the traditional Chinatown, what I like to call the traditional Chinatown, to the popular Chinatown, basically People's Park, you can see a wonderful perspective from that bridge, and you will see the houses really which are running like ladies, like dolls. Basically, the idea of the shop house, according to the Italianized style, and which was the two level house, but we also have different styles because basically we have at least five styles of the shop houses. Was the one to have kind of the decoration and the shape of a woman. So the skirt, the belt, and the upper side, which were basically decorated and painted in different ways, in very colorful and playful ways. So we can see how much of the Italian style is present in Singapore the moment that we think of something like that. And speaking about the shop house styles, we have the early style, which is the first one. Basically, the first shop house is erected around 1840, and they were very simple. These are the ones that I basically, and the ones in Chinatown, that resemble those houses, and they have simple lines and unadorned of detail. And then you go on with always more accurate, detailed, and I would say kind of baroque shop houses, with the first transitional, which is around the 19th century, the late one, which we can already find with 3 floors, already starting like that. The second traditional, which is the one which is the richest one, so with the Corinthian columns and pillars, the French windows, that we Italians call them persiane, and a lot of glazed ceramic styles, which are taken basically from the Portuguese and the Peranakan legacy. Till we arrive to the Art Deco. The Art Deco is the one that will show the movement of technology. So the forms are quite dynamic and curved, and we'll see these are the last one, usually built between 1940 and 1960. The most evident example of Art Deco is the one when we go to Tiong-Bahru, and this is what I will connect later with the Singapore Improvement Trust and what Nolli did, at least, and surely he met with the architects who were the directors of the Singapore Improvement Trust, which was was started in 1927, instituted in 1927, and basically lasted till 1958. There were 3 different directors, mostly Americans, British directors, and the last of them, Fraser, architect, was from 1941 to 1958. The Singapore Improvement Trust was basically the ancestor of the HDB, the House Development Board. The Singapore Improvement Trust didn't have among his duties the one to build popular houses like we know now with the House Development Board. Basically, it had hygiene purposes, and also in case of epidemics or fires or other kind of situation, it had to provide for shelter for people from the houses and for a temporary shelter. So among his duties, its task was not the one to build houses, but then it started to build the first satellite cities in Singapore. So we had the idea of Queenstown and Tiong-Bahru, which were basically built by the Singapore Improvement Trust. But we will go back to this later. This is just to show how much of affection we have with the Italian style. And since we are speaking about Italian style, let's see what was the architecture in Italy during the 19th centuries and the 1950s, which is basically the period that, speaking about Nolli, Nolli was working. So, of course, we have the Liberty, and the Liberty is the ancestor of the Art Deco. You can consider like that. We are speaking about Europe, but of course, this is affecting also Italy. So Italy will have also with the fascism, will influence and will be affected also by other European architectural styles. We have the Futurismo with Sant'Elia. Sant'Elia was a genius architect, but unfortunately he died very young during World War I as a soldier. He had futuristic ideas about projects for buildings, and this is all the period. Also, the architectonic space connects to the time in a systemic plan of technology with machines. Let's imagine the 19th century, the 20th century, because now we are in the 20th century, is the century of technology, with industry getting stronger and stronger. The industry revolution before all over Europe, a lot of modern architectural movement. They start thinking of the technology as the future, and this is why from Futurismo we'll have also the Art Deco. The Art Deco, which is also very common in Singapore. Let's think, as I mentioned before, the Tiong-Bahru, but also let's think also of the Tanjong Pagar railway station, and why not to Collier Quay and the Fullerton on the bay. These are all examples of Art Deco. The fascism, anyway, blocked it also because the other countries isolated Italy after the fascism and the war with Ethiopia, the invasion and the creation of the Italian Empire. They isolated Italy. So the modern movement and the Italian rationalism and the movement 900, they were recalling Lombard neoclassicism of the 18th century with a simplified and austere language. And also the monumentalism were basically the styles of the fascism. And in this period, Italy was quite isolated by other countries. The fascists will fall after World War II in 1945, and after that we'll have the neorealism, and is the style which will affect the modern constructions of Rome and other cities after World War II. So this is the architecture's styles in the period of Italy, if we consider it in the same comparing to the period of the life of Rodolfo Nolli. This will also affect somehow and I have a theory, it will affect same the modern development of Singapore. Let's think that a lot of Italian architects, and of course Nolli, even though he lived abroad, but he knew about that. We have some dialogues he had with Fraser and also with the Singapore Improvement Trust directors, even though he was a sculptor. But we know that, for instance, Italian architects, especially for the new plan for urbanization of Rome, they plan to create a modern and functional city. And they even planned, some of them, which is crazy, they plan, and they also did it anyway, they plan to destroy some ancient and old areas of the city. For instance, we know that the Borgo Spina, the Thorn Burg, the one very close to St. Peter's, basically was completely erased by Mussolini in order to create the Via della Conciliazione, a more functional road, and also for the Patti Lateranensi, for the agreements that the Italian state had with the Vatican once they finally solved once and for all the fight that had been between the St. Peter's Church, basically the Catholic Holy See, and the Kingdom of Italy. So basically, this functional style brought by the fascism, and same how it was also in modern Paris by others, aimed to destroy. So there was many ideas even in the areas of the imperial forums in Rome to destroy some areas, to cover them in order to create some arterias, some bigger malls and roads in order to connect much easier the modern city, which needed technology, movement, dynamics. So remember this, because this is basically what we can see after that in the Singapore Improvement Trust and in modern Singapore. So these ideas were already in the period of fascist architecture, and Nolli shared them as well with those directors of the Singapore Improvement Trust. They already had these kind of ideas, and anyway, they will be developed later, but the HDV. But it's very interesting to see how much the Italian architect style and ideas somehow affected what is modern Singapore. So not only with Nolli, but also with this modern functioning city. So you will think, oh, when will Fabrizio speak about Nolli? I will reach there, but we need to understand all around the context, 360 grades. So we spoke about the different Italian styles which affected the British colonial style. And I told you, you will be surprised, and some people might also criticize me about the Italianized style of the Chinese shop houses. But we see that there is a lot of connections with Italian architecture. And this connection goes further in Southeast Asia. So it's very important to know that, because if we think, let's think to the small elephant, which is now in the old Parliament House, basically the House of Arts, where was the first Parliament of Singapore and the oldest house built in Singapore for a Scottish merchant. So what is basically the old Parliament? Now you see this small elephant, which is a present from King Chulalongkorn. Chulalongkorn was the first king of Siam who started to go abroad and the first king who visited Singapore. This king presented the elephant to the government of the Singapore settlements, and the governors, the British governors, they basically gave him some areas lost somewhere, what is now Orchard, and where there is now the Thai embassy. So this is the famous king. It's the same king, the king Chulalongkorn, who visited Singapore. And this king was very open to European and to foreign influence. So he visited abroad and was very interested, especially to Italy and to European architecture and arts. The king visited the Tuscan Pavilion in Italy during the International Exhibition of Arts and met with the Florence artists. So we have to think to that as well. The first Florentine artist who will come to Southeast Asia is Galileo Chini, who basically is he was born in 1873 and he will die in 1956. So in the Rome exhibition, in the international exhibition, he showed his masterpieces, and after that, the king Chulalongkorn invited him to design and supervise the creation of the decorative artworks in the interior of Ananta Samakorn throne hall. So after that, the Chini opened the gate, opened the way to a lot of Italian artists to come to Siam first. So this is very important to know because a lot of Florentine artists will come together and together with the architects and engineers from Turin. So the Italians start to go to Siam, nowadays Thailand. So we have also Carlo Rigoli and Giovanni Squanci, Giovanni Barsi, and other, and the plaster sculpture Giuseppe Innocenti. They all come and they are very appreciated. They are very appreciated, and also the British start to know about them. A person who is very famous, and if you visited Bangkok, you will see the Madame Tussauds Wax Museum is also Corrado Feroci. If you visited the Wax Museum, the Madame Tussauds in Bangkok, you will find the wax statue of Corrado Feroci, because Corrado Feroci is the one who instituted the Thai art school and brought it to international levels. So he created the Fine Arts Sculpting School in Thailand, and was so highly regarded that it was naturalized Thai with the name of Silpa Virasri. So when you will go to Bangkok, you will find a lot of architectural sites which have been made by him, and he married later a Thai lady and will live in the Thai court. He was naturalized also because we don't have to forget that there was World War II in the meanwhile, and Italy joined the war, unfortunately, with Japan and Germany. In 1943, Italy signed an armistice with the Allied forces, so basically went from one side to another. So where I was here, and basically Thailand was affected, and especially the Malaya, the area of Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, will be occupied by the Japanese. The Japanese, once they will know that the Italians sign the armistice, will make prisoners of war and intern in lagers all the Italian soldiers from the submarines who came here, and also artists. But thank God the king of Thailand naturalized, gave the citizenship to Corrado Feroci, and Corrado Feroci will become from since then a Thai citizen under the name of Silpa Virasri. And Nolli will not be so lucky as well. But let's go again and reach the uncle of Rodolfo Nolli. So we must thank Vittorio Novi, who was a sculptor and working in Lombardy. So he was from the area of Lugano, close between Lombardy and Switzerland. And he is the one who was a sculptor as well, and will move to Bangkok in 1914. So let's imagine then, let's take this date of 1914 with Vittorio Novi moving to Siam, and he will bring, same as the other international artists, will be in that period, he will bring his nephew, Rodolfo Nolli. So we finally, after all this introduction and context, to show how Italian architecture, Italian artists affected all over the British colonial style, and therefore Singapore style. And also we see in the Italianized Shophouse style, they were 5 foot, and also in Siam. The British noted Nolli, and we finally arrive to our Rodolfo Nolli, who was the nephew of this Vittorio Novi. So here we are with Rodolfo Nolli. Here we are Rodolfo Nolli, young with mustache, like we can imagine of any Italian. And he was born in 1888, so the uncle was older, around 20 years. He will come very young to Siam, around 26-year-old, and he will live 75 years. He will die in Italy. So he will go back in Italy at the end. So he is one of the Italian artists who came to Southeast Asia at the invitation of King Chulalongkorn of Thailand. He is called Cavaliere Rodolfo Nolli. Cavaliere means knight, because this is a special title. He will be awarded with the Order of the Crown of Italy, a form of knighthood that carry with it the title of Cavaliere. What I mentioned, it means knight, for the effort that he did in Siam. So the Kingdom of Italy will give to Nolli this title, honorary title of knighthood, for all the activities that he did in Siam, which is quite a lot. And anyway, he was already had been noticed by the British and had been invited to come to Singapore in 1925. So he was already 37. So he left Bangkok for Singapore and will live in Singapore for quite a while. What I meant, and I told you, as he met with Collier, Williams, and Frasers, the architects and the engineers of the Singapore Improvement Trust, he will also affect, talking with them, the ideas of a functional city, which we'll see later. So it will affect a lot. His views have a strong impact on Singapore's urban landscape. So let's not forget, Nolli is a sculptor, and he had a lot of plaster innovations that he used in Bangkok for a lot of solutions, architectonical and urbanistic solutions in Siam. The British noted him for it, and they asked him to support the building and the construction of the most important Singapore last colonial buildings. The most famous of them is the Supreme Court. But he is also famous, in my opinion, even though not so well known, also because he will have this strong impact sharing the functionality of the modern city, like we have Singapore today, and we had through the American directors of the Singapore Improvement Trust until 1958. So, what did Nolli make in Singapore? He's very famous for some of the things that we can still find. A lot of things basically have been lost, especially sun ceiling. I mentioned before that Nolli was very good in plastering and creating some solutions like you see today. Today we used to see, especially in the HDVs, some fake rocks. These rocks made with some mold in cement, and basically they're empty inside. It was basically the style of Nolli that used for a lot of same of Callan's architectural structures and the plasters that he used and he created a lot of new plasters as well. So he's famous for these things, even though you don't think of that so much. He's also famous because he designed the marble decoration of the College of Medicine, the building, which was completed in 1926. So Nolli arrived in 1925. In 26, created the College of Medicine building, marble decorations, and the old Supreme Court building, which was completed in until 39, finally, just before the war. Just before the war. So the Tanjong Pagar railway stations, entrance hall, and the marble bas relief figures of agriculture, commerce, transport, industry are attributed to Nolli, even though some people attribute it to some of his disciples, local disciples. Some of them, in fact, are disputed. But for sure, he also designed the cast iron lamps and the lion reliefs of the Elgin Bridge. So if you go there, and I was passing there today, I had a tour, I'm also a tour guide. So today I was telling my Italian tourists this is something done by the Italian artist Rodolfo Nolli. And you will see them. I will show them later. We have some slides showing them. Then we have a period in which we consider how come in 1950, 1952, because basically in 1930, in the 1930s, Nolli had a very serious accident. As every Italian, he liked cars and fast cars. While he was driving a car, basically he had a terrible accident, risking his life, and he broke both his arms. But this is basically not shown and shared in his biography. You must search quite deep for it. But he had a lot of problems. He needed a lot of surgical operations. He could not use his arms for quite a lot. He even created some kind of special devices in order to help him move his arms again, because anyway he was an innovative Italian. He was not the only. If you watch the movie about Salvatore Ferragamo, he did that. He has a similar accident to his leg, and he was risking to be amputated his legs. Same for Nolli. He risked to be amputated his arms, and it took quite a lot of time to uh, to feel better, to recover. After that, we can say that there was World War II started in Singapore, and basically Nolli was an Italian. So even though was an artist, he was taken and taken as a prisoner of war later and brought to Australia, where he stayed until 1945. So for a long period, Nolli was basically blocked due to this accident and to the war. He will come back to Singapore after the end of World War II. Most of the prisoners of wars, will be released in 1946. And he will come back to Singapore just to find his studio completely destroyed and everything stolen. Most of his projects and design had been stolen by the time. He will still work on new projects. He will work on many new projects that anyway, they are most of them almost lost. He will work for sure on the pair of lions of the Bank of China building in 1954 and for the Merdeka Bridge, same in the same year. The Merdeka Bridge. If you don't know where is the Merdeka Bridge, you can imagine that is the bridge, the Merdeka. You know, that is the pioneer generation who built Singapore and fought for the independence of Singapore after Indonesia and Malaysia were basically against Singapore. So this generation, the Merdeka Bridge is represented by the Merdeka generation is represented by this bridge, which is the one connecting the close to where is the stadium now, basically. To give you an idea about where is the bridge. After that, he will move in Brunei in 1958, and he will go back to Italy. So we know he died in Italy. What is probably the most famous masterpiece on Nolli is the DIKE, the Justice. DIKE, or Dike in modern Greek, is basically the goddess of justice. So if you watch the pronaos or the facade of the old Supreme Court building, you will see the decorations, the Corinthian and Ionic columns, and the tympanum sculpture, what we call the pronaos, the tympanum on the pediment. These are the work of Cavaliere Rodolfo. In English, they call it Cavalieri here, but basically it's Cavaliere Rodolfo Nolli. So it took more than 1 year to complete, and we'll see that most of the world and the other architects who designed the projects for the Supreme Court, they propose Nolli some ideas for the DIKE, for the justice, but Nolli prefer to design his own justice. How is the justice? The justice is usually depicted with a blended, is blind. Why? Because basically the justice cannot watch at or favorite or decide I will have this person and not the other. So the justice must be blind in general. So we have a lot of Greek mythology with the justice, and the justice is blind. The justice of Nolli instead is not blend covered, but is a justice who can watch very seriously. And this was Nolli's choice, because he thought that the justice must be something that can watch seriously and take a good judgment of the reality. The justice has a scale on one hand and a sword. So the justice is right. We expect the justice to be right and to be correct for the society to work. The justice is very important for a society to work. And we can see that here in Singapore. So we have people who ask on one side, who pledge for the support of justice, and on the other side, we have all of the arts and the economy fields, because basically the society cannot stand if there is not good justice. The economy will not stand, a society will not stand without a good justice. So these are all allegories which are in this tympanum, in this pronaos. Pronaos is exactly the term for the Greek temples. This is not a temple, so we can speak as a facade. This is basically the triangle which is in front of the facade of the Supreme Court. So this is an explanation of the allegory of justice. We can expect the justice to see very well. It's not just deciding bias. And this pronaos is quite a huge work. So let's see together, and we are getting closer to the end of our seminar or our lecture. So, as I mentioned before, my idea was not only to mention about Nolli, who is probably the most famous Italian in Singapore for his artist achievements, but also to mention the Italian style, the architecture, how much it affected. Believe it or not, but Italian architecture affected British colonial style and affected much more not only the colonial buildings and palaces, but also the general Italianized style of normal shop houses as well. And even the 5 foot was taken from there. So we see the Elgin Bridge. When you pass and you cross the Singapore River, you will see these lion roundels and the iron lamps. They have been done by Rodolfo Nolli in his first periods in 1919. So you will see that next time, and you will be probably more careful once you cross the bridge. The allegory of justice is the one that I mentioned just before. In 1937, and the building will be ending in 1939. There is the time capsules inside when you enter into Sovereign Court, and the justice is quite impressive. You see this justice pending out when people are entering. Justice is watching you. Justice has this scale. He will judge accordingly. So expect this word to cut the truth. Be good or go to jail. So just to describe it what I mentioned before. So there is the justice in the center. To the left, there is a person begging for mercy or for protection that you can see here in the left, on the left side. And next to him, there are the legislator with the books in hand, as you will see. And this is quite long. It's a 21 meters long monument. On the other side, instead, there is a figure showing a man and a bull, and a figure showing gratitude. On the left side, there is a person asking for protection or begging. On the other side is the gratitude, because justice has been given. And then there is a man and a bull, and two children holding a sheaf of wheat. Everything representing wealth, prosperity, and abundance, where law and justice prevails. So these are exactly the words from Rodolfo Nolli. He taught quite well how to sculpt his justice. Don't forget the Ionian and the Corinthian capitals and columns have been done by him as well, and a lot of other decorations. The Bank of China building, it is 1952, so we're first place in Singapore in 1952. So you can find in Bank of China. So the lions are quite famous, and these are the stylized lions done by Rodolfo Nolli. The lions guard the entrance, and they don't want bad spirit to enter, especially for a bank. And the Merdeka Bridge lions, they're not there anymore. So remember, in the Merdeka Bridge were these lions, but they've been moved now at the Armed Force Officers College now. So you'll have to watch them there. You see, the lions are quite modern. They are in mold. They are representing the same lion. They were molded, and they are a bit directing toward their right side, because you could expect, according to the Singapore left side driving direction, that the lion was watching at you when you were entering in the track. So that's all about Nolli. What I mentioned before, he left, is the most famous Italian artist here in Singapore, probably the most famous Italian as well. There have been many more Italians in Southeast Asia, but I wanted to share that. Let me move here. This is me back now. I wanted to share what was the importance of Italian architecture in Singapore. So through Nolli, we could have a full background of history of British imperial architecture, Victorian architecture, and how much Italian style affected it. I hope you enjoyed this, and of course, we tried to be quite brief. There could be a lot to say, but I just mentioned the most important things. I hope you enjoy it, and tomorrow we will go on with our next event, which is in Italian anyway. It's only in Italian. The next event will be the critics of the Filippo of the Golden Leaf tomorrow. Alessandro Vetuli will speak in Italian and will give a lecture about the Golden Leaf di Filippo Rossi. So I thank you once more, and while I still want to emphasize that this is a part of the Italian festival activities organized by the Singapore Italian Association, and together with my Fabitalia. I will also speak again about the 2nd of June, because we had some technical problems with the slides, and we lost part of the slideshow. So I want to thank you all for your patience, and I hope I left something interesting. So next time you pass across the Elgin Bridge, just watch, please, the lions there. And next time also you go to the National Gallery, please watch on the left side the tympanum. And remember, this has been done by Rodolfo Nolli. I see there is Linda now. I just invite you, but basically we are done today. You can keep in touch. And I thank you all. Now we are ending. Thank you all for watching. This is especially a restream event, so it will be shown and shared in the channels and the Facebook social media and general social media of the Italian Association. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed. So Linda, same, as you could not watch before, you can see it later in the Facebook profile of the Italian Association and probably on YouTube. Thank you so much and have a nice evening. Remember, tomorrow, Filippo Rossi and the Golden Leaf with the lecture from Alessandro Vetuli in Italian. It will be only in Italian. So for Italian students might be good. For people understanding and speaking English might not be the best. Thank you so much and good night.